Alright guys, so one more video before we get to the actual making the recipe screen. So I want to make sure we have all our bases cleared because we have actually simulated and emulated some of this process now. So I want to actually show you this. Now, real quick when it comes down to it, let's go down to here and let's go down to our code. Now in the mixing tank routine, okay, so we've talked about some stuff. We've added our basic controls in here before. And let me actually draw this screen up a little bit closer so you can see the actual window. Let's actually draw this a little bit closer. So we'll come in here and we'll get our view and zoom in just a little bit so you can see this just a hair bit better. So same thing we did before though, right? We did our controls. We basically did our HMI controls so we can control this stuff just like we do from our HMI. When it comes down to our valves, stuff of that nature. So now we have our valve controls. We talked about that briefly. Now, what I wanted to actually talk about is coming in here doing some of the simulation. Okay, so what we've done is we've added some code, right? So we've added this, if the mixer motor is running, if the batch is active, and the caffeine's added, the corn syrup is added, and the master batch has been added, then we're going to run our mixer motor. In the current state we don't have a reset, so I'm manually resetting this stuff, but in the current state we are. All I'm saying is, okay, so we've added our components. Now I'll talk about where I'm getting these real quick so that we understand where I'm getting these. Come over here and we can see that I've added this over here in our premix section. We've added in our controls to say, okay, so the level from our actual recipe that we're actually doing, so what our current level is, right, in each one of these, in each one of our actual components, right, so each one of our ingredients, I'm saying the flow meter is actually saying it's okay to use this, it's actually okay to use this, or it's actually, has added it, right? So in the case of what we're talking about here, I'll show you this real quick. So in the flow meter, if I were to just reset the flow meter, just like that, it would show that it's okay to add it. So now I'm okay to add that component. Okay, so you see this right here, okay to add the master batch. Same thing for this down here. This again, I have to manually reset the flow meters because we're actually simulating those, but same thing down here. You can see this. And now in this rung, what I'm doing is I'm waiting, and I'll blow this up just a little bit better. So I'm actually waiting to see that I have actually added the actual master batch before I continue on and go to the next thing, which would be in this case corn syrup, right? And so then the same thing being said for down here, and this, let me reset this one. Same thing being said down here that I've actually added my caffeine. I've actually added my caffeine and I've added this. So the recipe is not active and it's okay to add. Okay, so I'm saying that, and this is how I'm deriving this information. So as you see right now, they're not active anymore because I basically reset those. And what I'm doing here is that I'm saying, okay, well, if the motor timer's done, it's kind of like a buffer. All I'm doing is a simple buffer to buffer in the motor. And in that being said, once the motor is actually running, then I will ignore it. But if the motor is not running, then I'm going to do a start request. And then the motor start request, if you follow that out, the only other place I'm using that is to start the actual mixer motor. So let me highlight that. You can see that I'm actually using that to start that mixer motor. So that's where this would come in. So I'm doing this in my mixing tank routine. Okay, so this comes down to the next spot, which is saying I need to be able to use my batch timing. So if you've noticed, and on this screen I have my batch timing, right, but it's not showing right now because I haven't animated. But if I were to go right here, you would see the batch time right here, right? You can see I have my batch time and the calculated minutes left during the batch systems, right? So as it's added all the components, now it's in the mixing time, right? So the time to mix. So that's all I'm saying right here. So this is what it's saying, is it is saying the batch is active, okay, and it's also saying that the motor's running, and then we're going to calculate our time, and then we're going to come down here and we're going to say, okay, our time preset time is actually less than or greater than the actual ACC. So as soon as the ACC is exceeded, it will stop the actual subtraction. So the subtraction, what we're doing here is we're subtracting our ACC, which is our accumulated value of our timer, by our actual preset, and we're getting our milliseconds again, and then our milliseconds we're coming in and dividing that by to get our actual 1 decimal point minute, right? So if you can break this down, this is the time to mix. So I'm saying the time to mix is going to be 10 minutes. So 10 minutes times the number we have here. This is basically if we talked about the timing of a timer and control logics, it's again done by 1 second per 1,000 milliseconds. So all we're doing is we're multiplying 10 times the proper amount of milliseconds, and then we're getting our presets so that we get the proper amount of milliseconds for our actual preset. And our preset again is going directly to this timer, so if I change this number, it will change this. So if I were to change this to, let's just say 9, it would change the number. As soon as the batch is active, it would come in here and change this number. Now again, I'm not going to actually do that. I'm going to keep that at 10 minutes. And then, but all we're doing here is again taking the number from the recipe, we're getting our proper milliseconds for our timer, then we're also coming in doing our proper milliseconds, making sure that we subtract that to get back to milliseconds so that we can say, okay, this is the proper amount of time we have left. So this is just for the actual calculated HMI, for the actual value or indicator for the operator to understand and know how much time is left for the mixing process, right? And then once the mix is done, and I'm doing this in a retentive timer, so we haven't really spoke on retentive timers, but retentive timer is going to retain the actual time that it is actually done until the batch is set to done. So right here, just like this, it would say batch is done. It would reset that timer. This is exactly why I wanted to do that, so that you can see that it has reset that timer now. So that is a retentive timer. So unlike a normal timer, which is, if it's not active, it will reset itself. A retentive timer has to be reset with a reset command based upon the reset up here. Okay, so now we've kind of briefly talked about that. We're going to talk about some of this down here. This is basically saying the batch is finishing, and as soon as the batch is finished right here, what this is going to do is we'll do a batch complete. Once the batch is complete, and again, so we don't actually have anything coming in controlling this right yet, but what we can do, and I'll throw this in here as well, is we can just change this to batch complete right here, and then what I need to do is put this in another spot. So we're going to come over here, and that way you can see this being edited, and we're going to run this too, so I want to actually show you this running. So now that we have this batch complete here, I'm going to go back up to my batching controls, and in my batching controls I'm going to change this right here to this right here. So when I do start my batch from my HMI button, which we don't have yet, we haven't added our HMI button, but once I start this batch, once the batch is complete, it will run until the batch is complete, then it will unseal that active bit. Okay, so that's talked about. Now again, so what this is doing is saying the batch is active, the caffeine has been added, the corn syrup has been added, the master batch has been added, the mixing time is done. Then I'm going to do a batch settle time. Okay, so the settle time is basically saying, and we can change that to settle, it's set time, but really it's the settle is allowing it to just basically, you know, sit there and kind of debounce, if you would. So it's basically a settle time, and that's why I'm saying here in the highlight notes, I'm saying the mix is finished. time to allow the batch to settle before we transfer. Okay, that's all that's doing. So we're actually saying we're not even going to allow it to say is batch complete until the time is done. Now, with all that being said, being that we are emulating the flow control, we are emulating the tanks, we are emulating the motors, right? We're going to have to emulate the actual weight of the batch tank, right? So the mix tank, the mix tank that we're talking about right here, the product mix tank, we're going to have to emulate that as well. So what we're doing here is we're basically saying, okay, well, for the first product, which is going to be our master batch, if AVO1, AVO3, the pump is on, and the rest of the components of the second for the current corn syrup are not on, then we're going to say, okay, we're going to have the flow meter value multiplied by 1, and we're going to give the proper weight. Okay. Now in the current system right now, this is the weight. I have to manually reset the weights because we don't have a reset right now for the simulation. So I'm just going to show you that that's the values that are in there. So I'm taking the emulated value of the flow meter, I'm basically timesing it by 1, and once that's hit that number, then it's going to hit, again, that derives back from the point of contact, right? So if we looked at all this stuff over here, we add, multiply, less than, clear. If we looked at the less than, this would be exactly what it's going to run to, right? So again, that goes back to working in conjunction with our recipe system. So this is why I'm explaining all this right now, because I want to make sure that you understand when we make our recipe screen, all this is going to be fluent and perfect. So in the next instance, what we're saying is, okay, so now we have our batch, or we have our master batch in there. Now we want to add our corn syrup, which is our AVO2, AVO4, and our pump 2 is on, and not any of the master batch stuff. Then we're going to say, okay, now we're going to take the actual flow meter emulation plus the actual master batch emulation, and then we're going to get the actual weight. Now the weight we're doing here is a temporary hold, and we're doing a temporary hold for 2 reasons. I want to explain this in detail, because if we just did another multiply here and another multiply here, what would happen is it would overwrite itself. So it wouldn't actually calculate this last recipe or this last ingredient if we did it that way. So we need a temporary hold, and that's what this is, mix tank weight right here. And we're adding this into a buffer. Okay, so we're immediately taking this value plus this value and going into the tank weight. The tank weight is going to go to, at this point, it's going to indicate, the reason for this top add is it's going to indicate, it's going to add it up, it's going to indicate to the actual HMI system, and this value is going to be here, right? This value that's going to be in this right here. And then we're going to then move it immediately to this buffer. Now in the next instance, once this is done, and it's simply done by the same thing we just showed a minute ago, I'll show you this again. As soon as this finished, based upon our amount of product that we want, our amount of syrup that we want for this product, then we want to come in and we're going to do our last ingredient, which is our caffeine. So this is where we're taking that buffered amount of the mixing tank, and we're adding the actual flow meter event, or the flow meter for the caffeine, and then we're adding that final value to the actual mixing tank. So all this is working perfectly. Now let me show you. Now as you see the HMI, you see all this stuff. I currently have 70 or 67% inside of my master batch tank. I have 80% in my corn syrup tank. I have in my caffeine tank, I have 95%. I have zeros on all my flow meters, and I have nothing inside of my product tank. Okay, so now we're going to come in here and run the process. So I'm just basically going to start the HMI. Okay, so I'm going to start. My batch is going to start. As soon as my batch starts, it's going to start running the product. Okay, so it's going to start running the first product, which is going to be the master batch. It's going to run this product up until our set amount. And again, so actually we're going to run this product again to our set amount, which is 250, I believe, on this one. So this flow meter, as you see, it's running. It's filling up. As you see, the numbers right here are working perfectly. So let me show you that inside of the actual emulation. So you can see this. So you can see this right here. This is the flow. You see this is active, this is active, this is active, this is not active, this is not active, this is not active. So we're putting in our first ingredient, which is our master batch. So we're using this top rung, and we're saying whatever the flow meter is for the top rung multiplied by 1. We're just doing a multiply in case we ever have to come back and change the variable to our actual mixing tank weight. Okay, now let's look at this. You can see those are working perfectly, and as you see, if we go back into our controls, which is going to be our mixer, the reason, okay, so up here in the very top, we're saying that the level is okay because it's above our constant. We're saying it's okay to add the product because it is not above the actual recipe amount. So at this point, where batch is active, we're okay to run, and we're okay to add our master batch recipe. And then we've actually called our valves. We told our valves to cut on AVO 3 first, AVO 1 then we've turned around and we've turned our pump on, as you see right here. So now that's how all that is working, right? So we now have master batch active. Now we haven't yet added our second ingredient yet, which we will come down and add our second ingredient in just a second. Okay, so now we're approaching our second ingredient. So we have 250 pounds of our master batch inside of this tank. Now we're running our corn syrup, which our corn syrup, our value is 100. So now we're adding this value plus this value, getting our added value, right? So it's actually, if you looked at it, it would be this value plus this value. So let me show you that. Okay, so we'll go back in this mixing tank, and now we're running off the second rung. We're emulating the second rung, so you can see that this first flow meter plus the second flow meter is giving the actual batch, actual mixing tank weight, and the mixing tank weight again is in the buffer. Now nothing is in this last little bit because we don't have it yet. So I'm gonna let you watch this transition, and when this transitions, it should then go to our actual caffeine. So now it's allowing our caffeine to come in here, which is going to be 25 pounds of caffeine. And as soon as we're done with that, 25 pounds of caffeine, it will then delay and then turn the mixer motor on. Now the mixer motor, as you did here, is sitting right beside me. So it did cut on. It cut on the drive. It is working at 10 hertz. And you see right now our mixing time is timing. So you see all of this stuff is working in conjunction with each other. So now as we're running a regular batch, I'm showing all this whole process, everything we've emulated and done so far. We've actually, all this stuff is accumulated and added up to what we're doing. Now again, this will run for 9 minutes, and let me show you this right quick. This is going to run, so again, this is emulated that product value. This is running for the 9-minute timer, so this is where I'm coming in. This is using the motor running. Again, that's that active bit that's indicating that the motor is running. Okay, that's sensing the PowerFlex 525 is sensing torque back from the actual motor, and it is sensing that it is running. It's spinning the rotor inside of the actual motor is actually spinning and creating a torque, right? So it is smart enough to understand that. That's where this active bit is coming from. So on a PowerFlex drive, that's where it's coming from. That's why we use it. So we're saying, okay, so now we're going to allow our timer to turn on, and then we're going to come down here and say, okay, well, our ACC is less than our actual preset. So, and basically we're saying that in this case we're doing the opposite instruction, because we're saying, okay, this is greater than this, greater or equal to. Okay, in this instance now we're saying our preset, and then we're taking our ACC, which is our accumulated value, minus our preset. We're getting how many milliseconds do we have left in the process. How many milliseconds do we have left? And then we're taking the milliseconds we have left down, we're dividing it by the actual number we have up here, and which is basically, again, coming back of the presets, coming back off the amount of milliseconds you need, or the actual divider or the multiplier we did before. So basically what we multiply this by, we're going to divide this by, right? And that's it. It's breaking down, giving us our minutes, really is what it's doing. So we have 7 minutes left in our process. Okay, once we're done with our process, we're going to indicate that the motor, when the motor is not running, we're going to do a batch complete. Okay, so the batch complete is going to indicate right here based upon the motor is running. Now again, we could have did this whole process right here in one rung, but we wanted to break this up in 2 different rungs because we want to understand what's going on. We want to have this settle time, right? So as soon as the settle time is done, then we will reset this value. So in the effort, so what we're doing, we're already run 6 minutes. What I'm going to do is actually speed up the video and let you see this in the instance of it actually running, right? So alright, so now we've at the last minute of our actual batching, right? So this motor has been running for 10 minutes at 10 Hertz. So we're at our last minute, and we want to actually go ahead and look at the controls real quick. So again, we're very close to finishing up, and this is again our last minute being calculated and added up. So at this point, we're very close to actually shutting off, and once this does turn off, it will turn off our actual motor control. Right, so this does indicate that the batch is active. It will turn off the motors, and it will go in and do that. So let's actually look at this real quick. So we're approaching that. We're coming in, and we have 0 minutes left. Now we could have did seconds. We could have transitioned this to seconds, and we may do that. But in this instance right now, we currently have it just indicating minutes. So normally I would have this transition from minutes to seconds, but only in seconds when it is less than the equated value of the minute, right? So it would indicate so many seconds at that point. But again, we'll come back and add that a little bit later, just to kind of show you that. But again, when it comes down to it, we're at the approaching time where we're going to be turning this off, and should be right coming up. So let's actually go back to our screen, and this will come in and turn our motor off. So at this point where we're at, and let's actually make sure that it does this, and I believe it waits on the settle time. This does wait on the settle time, which is the settle time is a minute. So it's not actually a long settle time before it actually comes in and does the batch right here. So that when the batch is completely shut off, that's when it shuts off the actual motor right here. So it gives it a little bit of extra time, and we may transition that the way that's worded from settle time, again, because it really does need to be settle time. So what we can do is say that when this timer is done, we can cut off the actual motor. So we can copy that and cut, but let's just go ahead and leave it for right now, and let's actually show that process actually working, because what I want you to do before I actually start doing any kind of fixing our controls or anything like that, I want you to actually see this actually stop. So the settle time is there, It is working. It's done. Now we have actually stopped. We still have our amounts in here. We haven't done anything with those. So we effectively have, transitioned back and turned everything off. So again, when it comes onto it, this is going into our batch controls up here and unlatched our batch active. So let's actually come in here and change the way that, because again, we could have used this timer right here to turn off our actual motor. So let's actually do that. And so you can see our stop controls, which are here, batch active. We can say this. We can come in here and add that in there. Is we can come in here and have a bit. It comes in here and does this. And actually, I didn't even have to do that. So sorry about that. So we have this, okay. And the reason I want to run them together, I mean, I don't have to, but the reason I want to run them together right now is at least to say if the batch is not active and it's actually, well, to tell you the truth, it just does need to be this. Because if the batch is not active, that makes a lot more sense and it actually works a lot better. So this will actually give our settle time the right way. So if we actually were to repeat this process and do our settle time, we can actually do that. So if I were to change that, again, I could actually simulate that whole process again, but just to show you that that does work and everything is working accordingly right now, again, that's exactly how this is working. So with all that said, throughout all the whole simulation, we wanted to just make sure that the way this was done, and I'm sorry about how long the video was, but I wanted to at least briefly explain the way we did the controls, because coming back and actually building all this in front of you would have took quite a bit of long time. And we've already done a lot of controls and a lot of things that we've done throughout this whole project right now that you completely understand the way we just did. I feel sure that if you have not skipped a video, that you understand exactly what we're doing here, right? So you understand exactly the process of how we're accumulating these values and how we're doing everything, so that we can move on to the finished product tank. We can do our recipe screen, we can do all of our other aspects and start tying this stuff together, so we can move on then to our actual ALMDs and do our alarming, because that is very important too. So we still have a lot of, I would say probably about, we're maybe, I don't know, 60% through with this project, but we need to still add a lot more stuff, and a lot of stuff's going to come together really quick, and it's going to start tying in together really quick. So I don't want you to skip any videos or go back. I mean, if you need to, go back and watch other videos, but again, these very long videos, I want you to make sure that you're part of these. You watch these, and I understand what it's like to go through these videos and understand what it's like to watch this stuff. So, but it all is important, and as far as the learning curve and as far as what we're doing and understanding the process of how we're doing the logic behind this. So with all that said, we'll continue on to the very next video.